Welcome. You are now linked to your telecom retirement.
Hey, how are we doing today? There's been a lot of talk in the news over the last couple of months about is Social Security going bankrupt? Um, Nikki Haley kind of touched upon it. I think it hurt her. I don't think she was going to win the nomination for Republican nomination for president, but it definitely hurt her because people were like, "Oh, Nikki Haley wants to cancel Social Security, or she wants to cut Social Security, and all these other awful things." But there's kind of it may just be because it's election season in general, or a presidential election season, that there's a lot of talk about Social Security and is it going bankrupt? So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit today about how Social Security works, because most people don't understand how it really works. They believe it's something that it isn't. Uh, is it going bankrupt, and what can be done and what might be done? The short answer is yeah, it's going bankrupt. And we'll talk about what that means. But it was designed, when they made changes to it back in the 80s, it was designed to go bankrupt at a certain point. They just delayed it. And that's how we're in the place we are. And they said, well, we'll figure it out for 50 years. And then in 50 years, they can figure it out again. And here we stand 40 years later. So let's go back. Social Security starts in 1935. It's actually officially called the Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance. You'll see that OASD sometimes acronym used. And so it's not just retirement, it's survivor. So if you pass away, your spouse and or your children, depending on how old your children are, collect the benefit. It's disability. If you're disabled, Social Security will pay you a stipend for that as well. There's a lot of things it does, and it's insurance. And that's the real key, is people look at it as a pension. Social Security is not a pension. It's a government program. Um, if you want to get technical, and my conservative friends lose their minds when I say this, Social Security is an entitlement program. It is. Do you pay in? Yes. Do you pay in regular taxes? Yes. It's just a separate tax. FICA, if you look on your pay stub and you get the 6.2% FICA tax and the 1.45% Medicare tax, the 6.2 in FICA is a tax. It's not a contribution to your retirement. It's a tax. And it goes into this plan that then pays out benefits. And starting in 1935, the tax was 2%. And you're saying, 2%, 6.2, that's not bad. I guess it's a little increase. That's actually pretty good. Oh, no. You give 6.2% of your pay through FICA, and your employer pays another 6.2%. And that's not how it started out. It started out with workers only were paying into this. So we've gone from 2% to 12.4% paid into this system. And part of it is because I didn't look up this number exactly, but it was something like 8 or 10 workers in 1935 paid for each retiree. And now we're down to like three. Three workers pay for every retiree, because Social Security was set up originally in 1935 that current workers pay for the benefits of current retirees. It was that simple. Today, it's not as simple as that. Definitely has changed a couple of times since the early 80s, but it's similar. So you pay in based on this tax you pay. And it just so happens that your benefits are loosely based on your income level, but have no bearing on how much money you paid in or how many years you paid in to some extent. It's really a very convoluted formula. If you've ever, years ago, they used to hand out, Social Security used to have a booklet. They may still have the booklet. You probably download it. And the back of the booklet, you could go through and write down all of your years worth of contributions. You can actually get the statement from Social Security now that will do the same thing. And they would have a formula that you could work out and get to your number of what your Social Security benefit was. This was before they did it with computers and sent you that report every couple of years. It never came out right. And the reason is that Social Security benefits those that have contributed the least and has worked the least. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio like a pension would be. Is if I make $100,000 and you make $50,000 and we work the same number of years and we have the same birthday and we collect on the same day, I am not going to get double your benefit. I'm not going to. You're going to get greater than 50% of my benefit because it favors lower income workers. It's a social insurance. It's there designed as a safety net. And that was always what it was designed for. It wasn't designed um, to provide a massive amount of income. People talk about, I only have Social Security. And I think, oh my gosh, you didn't do any planning. Part of that is where we came from. Um, Social Security, when it was created in 1935, the retirement age was what? 65. Okay. All right. What's the retirement age today? 67. Think about that demographically. Um, how many people were living past 65 and how much further past 65 were they living in 1935? Not much. There weren't many people, which is why you had 8 or 10 workers um, paying for each retiree, and they were only contributing a total of 2% versus 12.4%. Today, we have a whole lot of people living past the age of 65. We're getting to the point where a lot of workers these days in their 50s and 60s are thinking 62, 65, 67 may be too early for me to retire for real. I may not want to work a go-go crazy job, but I'm going to have 20, 25, maybe 30 years in retirement. I may want to work longer. I may want to have something to do. And Social Security really isn't adjusted to that. Is in 1983, I believe, when they made the major changes to Social Security that we see today, they increased the retirement age. And retirees lost their mind. It went from 65 to 67. And it took 30 years for it to get there. They didn't do this change overnight. It's just getting to 67. And these changed 35 years ago. So even that small change made people very angry, which kind of leads to what's going on in reforming Social Security today. You can collect early at 62, regardless of what, is it, 62 is kind of even though the full retirement age rather has gone from 65 to 67, you can still collect early at 62. You'll receive a 30% reduction in your benefits for doing so. But the flip side is you wind up getting 5 more years of benefits, which may be valuable. We've run numbers a lot of times for clients or just running just hypotheticals. And gosh, it takes a long time to come back from collecting early. Is collecting early and getting those dollars early are a good thing. And the government still allows us to collect at 62. That's a big deal. That's something that may have to change with the coming decade. Is they figure that the estimate is 2035. I've heard 2032, 2031, 2034. We don't know right now. But Social Security was started in 1935, about by its 100th anniversary, about by its centennial. It'll be what's considered bankrupt. And we'll talk about what bankrupt means in a minute. There's a change that happened in the early 80s. So it started at 2%. And it rose somewhat. In the 50s, you saw an increase. In the 60s, you saw some increases, 70s. It wasn't until the Reagan administration. It started in Carter, but it wasn't really until Reagan that the presidency and Congress really got serious about Social Security. And I look back on that time, and I was a teenager, but this stuff always fascinated me. I think that if you look at Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who were the stalwarts of the Republican and Democrat Party. Tip O'Neill was from Massachusetts, go Mass. He was Speaker of the House. He ran Congress. That was his job. And Congress was decidedly Democrat during that time. And you had Ronald Reagan. And I think if you were to fast forward both of those guys today, they would be run out of town on a rail because they were willing to reach across the aisle. They were willing to work together to solve a lot of financial problems. They solved a lot of them. They kind of got us out of recession. They reformed taxes. The Tax Reform Act of 86, for all its ugliness, and there is some ugliness to it, my gosh, they did a great job with that. And people lost their jobs over that. People in Congress created it, voted for it, and got kicked out of Congress for it, even though people's taxes went down. Same thing here with Social Security. So 1983, they make a radical change to Social Security. Is they realize that we've got a problem, that we're going to have to either keep increasing this Social Security, this FICA tax over time until it becomes potentially onerous, or we can make a big increase now and hold on to the extra money. Is prior to 1983, the amount of money collected was the amount of money paid out. There was no quote unquote trust fund. Today we have this trust fund. And what about the trust fund? We'll talk about the trust fund and all of the crazy things that people talk about the trust fund that just are not true. But they said, let's create this trust fund. And then someday when we're not collecting enough, we can fall back on the trust fund. That's how they got it to fund for 50 years. From 1983 to 2035, we can fund this whole thing by utilizing this trust fund and adding money and setting it aside for later on. And the trust fund turned negative in 2009. So they did a good job. And it's been spending down since then. They figure, again, the latest estimate, I think, is 2035. 2035 is the quote unquote official number, but I've heard 2031, 2032. Big changes then. And that was something that, again, people lost their jobs over. Is how dare you change Social Security and increase my retirement age from 65 to maybe 66 and a third for a lot of these people. How dare you increase my FICA tax? How dare you make these changes to my benefits? It's not fair. People lost their jobs. And then today we have a situation where everything's kind of shrinking. And the latest estimate is 2035. And they say bankrupt. There's still money being collected, right? We're still paying into the system. What does bankrupt really mean? It doesn't mean that nobody's going to get paid. It means that the government is collecting about 80 cents for every dollar it pays out. So what do you do? Does everybody get 80%? Maybe. Does everybody does some people get 100% and some people get 80%? Maybe. And then some people are going to get like 60%, maybe 40%, maybe 0%. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. That's the big fear, is what's going to happen with that decision. Because no matter what, if it's 80%, you only have 80 cents, you need to come up with $1 worth of benefits. That's what everybody's expecting. Somebody's getting the short end of that stick. It's not so fun. I wouldn't want to be in that position. People will lose their jobs over this. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I know I'm hitting you rapid fire with this, but let's talk about the trust fund. And then we'll talk about kind of where we're going and what that might look like. The trust fund starts in 1983, and it's designed to hold the excess contributions to the Social Security system. How does it hold them? Well, it can't put it in the bank. There's no bank that can hold government dollars, is there? It's just, you think about it, it's like, okay, well, I'll put my money in the bank, and, Verizon or Microsoft put their money in the bank, but how does the government put money they can't put it in the bank? What do they do with it? Well, they buy treasury bills. They said, okay, let's find something that is very safe, because we don't want to buy into the stock market, because that would be crazy. There's a whole lot of problems to that. Let's buy treasury bills. We'll know the money is always there. We'll get a decent rate of return. The government doesn't pay taxes on their own income, so they're all set there. And we'll place it in there, and they'll mature every 90 days, and we'll just re-up and go from there. Which gets the phrase, the sentence I hear most often from conspiracy theorists is, and I'll catch it on Facebook, I haven't seen it in a couple of months. Congress is stealing money from the Social Security system. It's kind of almost true, but it's not true. So let's break this down. So let's go back. Let's say it's 1990. 1990, the government collects all the FICA taxes. It pays out what it needs to pay out. It has this extra money. It buys treasury bills. Now, what are those treasury bills doing? Congress sets the budget and they say, okay, we're going to set a budget of $4 trillion. We're only collecting 3.5 trillion. We need a $500 billion extra. So they instruct the Treasury Department to issue more T-bills to cover the loss. They have to create $500 billion out of thin air. And the way they do it is the Treasury lends that money out. As they say, we'll lend more money than we have covered. And because the Social Security Trust is buying those same T-bills, theoretically, you could say that Social Security is funding the deficit for a time, not since 2009. Since 2009, it's actually been working the other way. And Congress didn't make the decision to steal the money from the Social Security Trust Fund. They just said, we're going to set a budget and we're going to have a budget deficit. We're going to have a gap. And it's the Treasury's job to fill that gap. And it just so happened that part of the bills that the Treasury issued were purchased by Social Security, which is another form of the government. It's kind of like moving money from one pocket to another. It's very crazy. It's cerebral to think about it. It's kind of like when the Fed was buying Treasury bonds to keep interest rates down for almost 15 years. It doesn't make sense. You're moving money from one pocket to the other. What's the point? And it's all at that point, that was a shell game. And the result of that shell game is inflation. But I digress. That's a completely different podcast. So that's how the trust fund works. It's not, Congress is not stealing the money. And even if they were, they've been paying it back for the last 15 years, and they'll pay it back for about another 10, and it'll be all gone anyways. It's a self-correcting problem at this point. It's not in a lockbox. I keep hearing the word lockbox, and here's the funny thing is, you probably remember this. This has to be the funniest political moment in the last 50 years, because we still use the word lockbox, but it's the year 2000. It's George Bush versus Al Gore. It's Saturday Night Live. They're doing a mock debate on SNL, and they come out with their trite sayings, and Al Gore's saying was lockbox. It's the lockbox. We're going to put Social Security in a lockbox. It was already in a lockbox. It's buying treasury bills. There's no lockbox. And George Bush's, and it's so George Bush for them to pick on this, was strategery. And we still say those words today. I think that's awesome. That shows how much that's carried through almost 25 years later, probably 25 years later, that we're dealing with those things. So there's no lockbox. Congress is not stealing it. And it was a good plan. It was a great plan. It's a plan that they may end up utilizing again when they make those changes to the Social Security system. And let's talk about that. What are our options? And we should be aware of this, because these will all be discussed over the next 10 years. Less so now, more so in 8 or 9 years, when this becomes a serious problem. First thing you can do is reduce benefits. That's that simple, is reduce benefits. For who? I don't know. It probably won't be across the board. I would say my guess is that anybody collecting benefits will not see a reduction in benefits. You can't do that. You can't say to a retiree that's been collecting for 5 years, yeah, you're only going to get 90% or 80% or 70% of what you were receiving before. More than likely, they will reduce benefits going forward. They will reduce the cost of living adjustment, the COLA, to allow more contributions to be collected for every dollar that's being paid out in the future. It's trying to solve the problem on a forward-looking basis. This is a problem that you're going to lose your job in Congress. And hopefully there are people with integrity that realize that they want to, like they did in the 80s, they want to solve this problem for the next 50 years, not for the next 3. Because if you kick the can down 3 years, you're going to lose your job, and the next guy in your seat is going to lose his or her job. So fixing the problem is probably the best thing to do. So they might reduce the COLA. I would expect they'll reduce the COLA. There's been talk about that, serious talk about that in Congress over the last couple of years. Hasn't gone anywhere. We'll talk about why in a couple seconds. But reducing benefits is a viable option. Eliminating benefits is another option. Whoa, who's getting eliminated benefits? Well, if you think about this, if you're not over 65, you may not know this, but Medicare, when it was set up and we started collecting money for Medicare, I want to say in 83 as well, there was a Medicare Part B premium, and it was a couple of bucks. And then it was $50. Then it was $75. I think it's like 140 or 170. I actually don't know off the top of my head what the number is today for most Americans. Now, if you make more than a certain amount of money, your Medicare premium goes up substantially. If you make more than a much higher number, which is not a ton of money for a married couple in the Northeast, but for a retiree, you'd say, wow, that's excessive. That's a lot of income for a retiree. Your Medicare premiums go up dramatically. Like you're paying almost a health insurance premium because they're saying, look, you can afford it. You're going to pay it. I could definitely foresee them doing the same thing with Social Security. Is they're saying, look, it's social insurance. It's not a pension plan. It is not a pension plan. It is not there to guarantee you income. It's there to guarantee everybody a base. That was what it was designed for. That's still its mission today. And if you make, as a retired couple, $250,000 a year, do you really need Social Security? I don't think you do. It's not my decision. I don't want to offend anybody with that, but I could definitely foresee them starting to reduce benefits substantially on a sliding scale above certain income levels. Now, the danger with that is you want those numbers to index to inflation. One of the things, again, we talked briefly about the Tax Reform Act of '86. One of the aspects of that plan was the taxation of Social Security for people that make more than a certain income level. And that income level was $32,000 in 1986. That income level is $32,000 in 2024. It's not indexed to inflation. So you had very few people paying tax on Social Security back in 1986. You have, I would say, at least 50% of retirees today paying tax on their Social Security because their income exceeds $32,000 a year, because that's now below the poverty line for a married couple. So we want to make sure that there's an indexing to that, but I could definitely foresee them doing that. The third thing they can do, they can increase payroll taxes. If you just increase payroll taxes to, say, 8%, you'd kick the can down several years, maybe as much as a decade and a half, possibly, just by doing that. But now all of a sudden, it's now 8% more. It's almost 2% more of your pay. Plus, your employer has to pay another 2%, which means your pay increase next year is not going to happen because they got to pay this. Definite ramifications there. The other thing they could do is, right now, the maximum pay that Social Security FICA taxes are withdrawn on is about $168,000. It wouldn't surprise me if they raised that limit. Joe Biden in 2020 floated that idea of let's increase it to 400,000. It's probably not a bad idea. It's not a great idea, but it's not a terrible idea. Is increase the amount of money that's going into the program, but maximum benefits is based on $168,000 a year. How do you kind of equate that? How do you figure that it does give that break of your calculations and your tax are now on two different systems? It may be. Now, which one are they going to pick? I would expect a whole bunch of things, just like they did in '83. In '83, they created the trust fund. They increased the retirement age. And that's something else that they'll probably do this time, is expect that for future retirees. So if you're under the age of 45, 67 is a pipe dream for you. How about 72? That seems reasonable. Given life expectancy today, we've got to get Social Security back to where it was. 72 seems reasonable with early collection at, let's say, 66. I'm just throwing these numbers out, but it's definitely something that's going to happen. But in 83, they created the trust fund, they increased the tax dramatically, and they increased retirement full retirement age to a level that seemed at the time reasonable. 40 years later, it's not so reasonable. It's kind of still low. I would expect the same thing today. I would expect if they do a good job, there's a myriad of things they can do to have a minimal impact on people, on any one person or any one family, to actually make this program extend out for another 50 years or possibly more. Now, is it going bankrupt? No, they'll fix it. Should we panic? Definitely not yet. 8-10 years out, you can't panic about it now, regardless of what the news says. And I know we talk about this a lot. I talk about in our blog. I talk about it in my emails to clients. Is the news is not your friend, and they're going to hype up and whip up all of this panic over nothing. I wouldn't want Congress today to fix this problem. I don't think the Congress we have today would fix this problem. I think that there's too much. It's not special interest. We're not talking about, some person from XYZ Corp or a lobbyist whispering in the ear of politicians today. I don't think that's going on as much as it did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think that whether they realize it or not, the politicians today are polarized because it ensures that they get reelected. And it's sad. They may agree that, man, we can meet halfway, but we've done such a good job of polarizing anything. If I step one baby step towards the center, I'm going to get taken out by my own people. They're going to execute me. So I can't do it. So kind of my hope is that over the next 10 years, things calm down a bit. We have definitely polarized things, and it would be nice to we'll never get back to 1983 and Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, but it's nice to get close to it. It would be very helpful to do so. But right now, the good news is nothing is going to happen. Again, these people do not want to lose their jobs. They do not want to lose their jobs. And we're 2 presidential election cycles away from this going bankrupt. So Nikki Haley shot herself in the foot even mentioning it all. I wouldn't have said a darn thing. I guess if pushed on the question, if I was a presidential candidate, pushed on the question, it's a serious issue and we have to do serious things. But I'm going to tell you this is we're headed for a train wreck, and everybody's going to have to take a hit on this. And I don't know what that's going to look like, and nobody's going to be happy about it, myself included. But we've got to get there. We've got to act like a country together. We've got to pull together and solve this problem together, like we've always had in this country. That's the real answer. That's the correct answer. You didn't answer the question. You pulled the patriotism card. You're all set. Nikki Haley actually tried to answer the question. It's like, oh, don't do that. But yeah, 2 presidential cycles. If you're a representative, you get 8. It was 4 elections. If you're a senator, at least 2 elections potentially. I guess all of them would be 2 elections because it'd be 8 years. You might get 12 years out of it and be hated. So it's not worth. It is a hot potato. It's a hand grenade that they will not touch until it's absolutely necessary. And I'll tell you this is, like him or hate him, you look at the Trump presidency. You remember everything went down to the wire? Every single major thing went down to the absolute wire. The one that shocked me, the one I learned so much from when he passed the Tax Act, the Tax Reform Act back in December of 08, 09, whenever it was, 12, something like that, whatever year it was. Anyways, I didn't think it was going to happen. And I forgot that he is a master negotiator and he understands these things and he is very patient. If you've got a difficult decision to make, it's going to come down to the absolute wire. It is going to come down to the absolute 11th hour, 59th minute, 59th second, and that's when it's going to happen. When everybody thinks it's done, that's when that it's a disaster and it has crashed. That's when it gets done. If you look at the budget deals over the last couple of decades, you look at the extended the debt limit numbers over the last decade and a half. Even though it gets the last possible second, they start laying off people, they start furloughing park workers and things like that, and then they get to a deal. Why didn't they get to a deal 3 weeks earlier? Because politically it wasn't worth it. You had to get everybody to a point. Same thing here is I would expect if 2035 is the number, 2034 and 34 days, 364 days is really when it's going to get done. So until then, if you can remember anything from this podcast, don't sweat it. Do not sweat this at all. They will come to a solution, hopefully one that's long-term. That's a 50-year solution, not a 3-year solution. But despite all of your friends, all of the news media over the next 8 years, and it will get worse and worse and worse. If you remember back to Y2K in 1995, nobody knew what Y2K was. By 1999, every news outlet was talking about it for 60% of their newscast. Same thing here is it'll ramp up. It'll get more and more and more and more and more important. Remember, it's going to come down to the last minute and they're going to solve the problem. So you can just relax, hope that it works out in your favor, and hope that they come up with a good plan, but we can't worry about it well before it's going to happen. So that's what I have for you today. I hope that was helpful. Kind of gave you some insight in how Social Security works, in what's going on in the trust fund that nobody seems to understand, and the changes that will be coming down the pike in the future and what that means to us. If you have questions, jump down in the show notes. You can reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram, our website, and connect with us. If you have ideas for future shows, have comments, that's great. Definitely subscribe, leave a like, tell a friend. Till next time, stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to Your Telecom Retirement with your host, Dennis O'Keefe. Please click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available.